In my continuing to teach the first few chapters of Genesis, the anthropomorphism that I'll start with is just stunning, uh, disconcerting for those who want the God of the Bible to be like the God that we're taught to believe in, incorporeal, not having desire, not playing tricks, not pulling off con games. And then you read a poem like this, and God is human, needs a cigarette, needs a quarter, another cigarette, keeps the Bic lighter. And this humanization of the divine is just a really, really delightful poetic device. Anyway, I hope you have your Bibles out. I'm going to be jumping into Genesis, back to our story, just to uh, recap very briefly, I hope. The first chapter of Genesis is a very austere, beautiful, well-balanced, elegantly written poem that begins with the unformed chaos out of which everything is derived. It's a disconcerting image because I remember when I was in rabbinical school, we were taught that creation is ex nihilo, out of nothing. Of course, that's not correct. Creation is not out of nothing; it is out of tohu vavohu. And creation seems to be making a space in the tohu vavohu into which light has poured, but the tohu vavohu, the unformed chaos, is always, as it were, on the margins, and we assume hoping to overcome the light. Now remember, it says the eretz was tohu vavohu, not the shemayim, the land, and the light, of course, is a kind of a celestial phenomenon. And as we go on, we see that the tohu vavohu, now remember, this is all interpretation, is somehow still permeates the earth. You'll see why in just a moment. The poem continues. We have this strange locution, let us make man in our image. I was really taught that was the royal we, until in the past few years, I've come upon the idea of a divine council that you see especially in the first chapter of Job and in 2 Kings 22, if I'm not mistaken. I always mess up that verse. And we see God conferring with some kind of heavenly court. And and there are many other citations of this idea of the divine having a court. They are called the B'nai Elohim, the sons of God, or the one step lesser than God. They are called angels. Actually, several words for them. Sometimes image, as in Isaiah, of a fiery angel circling the throne, and sometimes image as a God who takes counsel with them. So let us make is not does not need to be interpreted away as the royal we if one is familiar with the idea that there is a divine council. I don't like the idea. It's very strange to me, but it's just a fact that there is. For example, especially look at the book of Job, verses 1 and 2, which also then tells us that it is as much a literary device as any kind of theological statement. Then it moves to God by God's self. It says, Vayivra Elohim, goes from the let us make to God, was it let us make, as in Naaseh, we shall make, to Vayivra, to create. And the word bara is only used with God. So it does go between the word asa, make, by the divine counsel, and then create with God in a the Elohim of God is now singular as opposed to the plural Elohim. The capstone of all this, remember, is Shabbat, and that's where we see the great disorder with which the chapter begins, moving into the great order of Shabbat. We went deeply into those verses. They're rather tortured verses. They don't grammatically make sense, but remember, it's a poem, and therefore the poem is delivering over a meaning that is not fully captured by the rules of grammar. We'll maybe come back that to sometime when we do a close study of Shabbat. But the more I'm actually restudying it this week, and the more I studied it, the stranger it became. We move into a second creation story where God is much more anthropomorphic. God shapes the human being out of the Adamah. And this is why this idea that the tohu vavohu, the chaos that was the earth in the first few verses of Genesis, are now, as it were, in the Adamah, in the earth, in the land, And when the divine shapes the human form, we have a sense that this Adamah, remember, into which the Tovabohu might still be sown in, there's a breath of God poured in. So this sets up the human condition. Now I know it's one of these my body spirit binary ideas, but it's there. There's something called the body, and not only the physical body, but I will call it the unconscious ego self, the lev, some part of our being that is not attendant to what I will call the concerns of the spirit. So the breath of God pours into the body formed of Adamah, formed of ground, and the ground itself. So I think the earth represents the non-spiritual side of the human being. The spiritual side, of course, would be something like consciousness or divine consciousness, not just awareness, but awareness fused with spiritual consciousness, and an oppositional force of the Adamah, which at the end of this first Torah portion in Genesis chapter 6 is named Kol Yetzer Machshavot Adam. All of uh, the shape of the thoughts of the human being are bad. It's overstatement, but it's pretty close for some people. And of course, it says there at the end, Kol Yetzer, uh, uh, the Yetzer of human beings. I don't like the word urge. Most people call the Yetzer Hara the evil urge, because it clearly speaks directly back to Genesis chapter 2, where it says Vayitzer, to shape or form. And now the shape or form of the human being is now the Yetzer Hara, which is one reason I'm saying that somehow the Adamah carries some of that chaotic residue from the beginning of creation. We move through chapter 2. Many things happen that set up the human condition, including realize that Adam has the Adam. Remember, his name is not Adam, although I slip into that sometimes. It's Ha-Adam. I call it Earth Man, as I did in my Shabbat email, because of the term Adamah in the name. When we say Adam, we forget it's from the word Adamah. I forgot where I first heard it. I was back in rabbinical school, but someone said we should translate Adam as Earthman, not as Adam, and I think that's quite perfect. The so this Earthman names all the animals, so he clearly has excellent command of language. He looks at each animal and knows its essence. In his looking to overcome his loneliness, God said, not one of them is going to be an Ezer Kenegdo, a fitting helpmeet for you. Adam goes into the Earthman goes into a deep sleep, and God seems to pull out a rib, and from that create the Isha, meaning from man. At least it's a folk etymology. The name Eve is not given until the very end of the story. So when we say Adam and Eve in the Garden of Creation, it's okay, but it would better be the earth man and his woman until the minute before they're exiled, when she's given her name Chava or Eve. She is now a fitting helpmate. The Isha word Isha just means woman. The woman is now the fitting helpmate or helpmeet of the earthman. They are in the garden, and of course, the operative words are verse chapter 2, verse 25, where it says, "Vayiyu shnehem arumim ha'adam ve'ishto." The earthman and his wife were arumim, here meaning naked or their genitalia showing. Velo yitboshashu, and they were not embarrassed. They were not ashamed. The operative word here is busha. Now, last time I gave a long commentary on this idea of shame as one of the core and most disturbing human experiences, often showing up in dreams and plaguing people with oftentimes hidden from others sense of insufficiency. For many people, hidden shame drives their lives to compensate. Sometimes people aren't even aware that they're driven by shame. And if someone ever touches their shame wound, they become furious. So I won't redo that, but I want you to know that when we see that when the woman and the earthman eat from the fruit of the tree of knowledge, they experience the shame of their nakedness. Now, the author is quite brilliant in yeah, I don't know if this is true that of shame being somehow a foundational experience of the human being, and we live our lives compensating for that. I think it's actually deeper than the Freudian idea that the core of our humanity is a sexual drive, and everything in some way is a commentary of the drive for sex, which can be a drive for pleasure, for domination, etc. And this author goes even deeper than that and sees somehow the deepest part of our humanity is the drive to overcome shame. So here they are in the garden. Of course, the next scene is the Nachash. The Nachash has a name, has to have been given by Adam if the story is coherent. And we assume the author is a coherent author. The word Nachash, of course, carries the redolence of witchcraft, of sorcery, of necromancy, of divination, and so forth. So the name comes loaded with negativity. Of course, Chava does not seem to know this, or she's overlooking it. And the Khan begins. He says, "Did God tell you that you can't that you can eat from that you can't from any tree in the garden?" He entices her to respond. She says, "No, no, no. We can eat from any tree. We just can't eat from the tree of knowledge, because the moment we eat from it, we will die." We saw this in chapter 2, emphatically, clearly. The Bayom acholchem mimenu mot tamu. The minute you eat from it, you will die. Um, the Midrash says that the snake nudged the woman into the tree. Oh, she adds, not eat from it nor touch it. So the Midrash says he nudges Eve into the woman into the tree. She doesn't die, which of course makes her doubt everything that's been said to her so far. She looks at the tree. This is worth repeating. Um, this is in chapter 3, verse 6, highly operative verse. The woman saw Vetera ha'isha ki tov ha'es lema'achal, it's good for eating. Vechi ta'avahu le'enayim, it's desirous for the eyes. V'nechmad ha'is lahaskil, and it is desirable. Ta'ava has a sense of essential desire, and nechmad can have a sense of a perceptive desire. By the way, the Ten Commandments says al tachmod. We use the word covet, but it's just another word for desire, more in the realm of perception and ideation than simply pure physical. So it says the tree is nechmad ha'et lehaskil. Now, if you looked up the word sechel, which has a sense of intellect in the Bible, lahaskil, to make oneself intellectually aware, it's mentioned, I think, last count, several dozen times in the Bible, and it usually has a sense of a higher intellectual, even mystical apprehension. So, whatever her linguistic abilities are, she knows the difference between it looks good, it's desirable to eat, and she has this word lahaskil in her vocabulary, um, and she takes of the pre. It never says that it's an apple. She says of the of she takes of its fruit and eats, and she gave it to her man with her, and she ate. Uh, all right, now we'll pick up right here, um, chapter 3, verse 7. Vatipakachna enei and their eyes were open. Remember, it's not patach, which is like to open the door, but pikeach means to suddenly a child whose pikeach is a clever, alert child. Lehit pakeach has a sense of I suddenly understood what's going on around me, to be perspicacious, in other words. So when it says their eyes were open, not just physically open, but their eyes were open to what's happening around them. And of course, in this case, their eyes are open to the fact that they are naked. But ותפקחנה עיני שניהם, וידעו, and they knew a direct play on Eitz Hadat. They eat from the tree of knowledge was the first thing they knew when they eat from the tree of knowledge, that they are naked. Erumimhem vayitperu ale te'ena vayasu lahem harot. So they immediately take fig leaves. Therefore, we assume that the tree is a fig tree, and they make themselves some kind of loincloth. All right, so I want to just give a quick initial commentary here, which is why these authors are writing the story. We'll assume there's a main author and maybe some editors. They're writing a story which is so theological disturbing. And here's why I have to remind us. The biblical understanding of the divine is oftentimes a divine that seems to work with a purpose to make things confusing and unfinished. And then the human being has to come along and finish the work. For example, the story of Jacob and Esau. We know from the story, Rebecca is pregnant. The twins are rumbling around in her womb, seemingly fighting with each other. She goes to an oracle. The oracle says you have two nations in your womb. They're fighting with each other, and one will dominate the other. The children are born. Esau is born first. Yaakov, which means heel, or to be on the heels of somebody, is grabbing Esau's heel and they're born. So it's as if they're born into a tragedy. They're born into a tragedy of a nearly murderous sibling rivalry with a lot at stake. Who's going to inherit the leadership of the tribe, the future of the people who will be called the people of Israel at that moment? Rebecca realizes my children are out of order. Now, we have to go back and remember Isaac prayed for his wife Rebecca to become pregnant. She was infertile. She becomes pregnant with twins who are born out of order. Now, this is some kind of divine oversight, but I'm going to, pardon me, put it a little bit differently. I hear sometimes people say, the universe is talking to me, because they don't want to say God. The universe gave me a sign. So, and then I have that Stephen Crane poem where the person speaks to the universe and the universe says, I really don't care about you. I don't even know you. Sometimes when bad things happen to us, we say, God's will, it's my karma. So we oftentimes have a sense that there's something supernatural above us that's putting us in life situations where we feel either gifted with a path before us or somehow impeded with our life's goals, sometimes forgotten. So I see the author trying to reflect the human condition of we human beings fighting against the condition in which we find ourselves. Life does not seem fair. Life seems to be tricking us. Life seems to be ambushing us. Sometimes there's serendipity where everything fits together. And sometimes it's the opposite of serendipity, where everything seems to be conspiring against us. So other religious traditions, I remember the coyote tradition. I think this is in Norse literature, that there's some Loci, I think, is the god. There's both the, as it were, the austere supreme god, and then there's the Loci, the god of the trickster, who's always trying to put the human beings into impossible and painful situations. What we seem to have here, and this is theologically very disturbing, which is why I say I don't get my theology from the Bible, that the God of Genesis 2, 3, and 4 is a divine that has not only this very powerful dimension, but also something of the loci dimension, something of the trickster in this divine. Now, this might be in some more ancient stratum, the divine council, that there's a trickster in the divine council. I think that might be true. And I could bring up other texts which show that there's some part of the divine which is somewhat off center, somewhat eccentric, which in some ways is not opposed to the human being, but definitely not going to make our lives easier. So to read the Garden of Eden story as a con, where the snake is enticing the woman, remember, she has confidence in him because he told her the truth that the that if you touch the tree, you will not die. And then, of course, the payoff is that they eat from the tree and they realize they are ashamed. So here's the interesting thing. In the normal confidence game, con game, the con person, the con artist, the con team are after money. Well, what is this con after? They're after the human being to go from innocence to, in the metaphor of not being ashamed, to consciousness of being ashamed. Now, this might be human beings looking at little children. You know, they have language, they're 2, 3, 4, intrepidly going around the world and taking this and laughing at that and having no idea what comes next when they turn 4, 5, 6. You know, having raised 4 children, I remember them in this pure, beautiful innocence. Uh, I use the age 3. They have language, not very elegant. They're just trying to figure out the world. It's not all coming together. You know, they have this the smelling and seeing and touching, and by age 4, there clearly are restrictions to what they desire upon them. They don't like it. They have tantrums. They get upset. By age 5, you can actually talk to them, and that's where, at least in our family, we began, you know, to read the rules of what's permitted, what's not permitted, and you can't have anything you want, and you have to behave in a certain way. So 5 is that moment when you realize you live in some kind of a moral framework. And when you think of the moving from 4 to 5, 4 is the world's for my pleasure, and 5 is actually it's not. Actually, you know, the world is not for my pleasure. By 4 or 5, I have to wear clothes. I don't want to wear clothes. Well, you have to wear clothes. So maybe it's a rumination on on the development of the human being from a state of pure innocence to realizing their nakedness and the complexity and somewhat tragic nature of the world. We're never going to get all the love we need. There's a certain insufficiency. We lack the power to do anything we want. We can't fly. We can't be invisible. Uh, we can't overpower adults. So we're born into a world. We're born into innocence, and it becomes a world of restriction, as if life is playing a joke on us. I'll add to that something that I think every adolescent is aware of, but usually goes underground. Some aware more, some aware less of this idea of shame, a kind of insufficiency that makes a person feel really bad about themselves. When they're not loved, they don't have some kind of athletic prowess, they're not as good looking as another person, they're not as smart as another person, a sense that they don't measure up. And this not measuring up can be seen as a sense of exposure. And therefore, people hide not measuring up, compensating in all kinds of ways. So the sense of not measuring up, some kind of chronic insufficiency, goes underground. And I think from this author's perspective, we live a good part of our lives trying to overcome the insufficiencies that we encounter throughout our childhood and adolescence. All right, that's my Torah on the theology of the author. For me, is 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 like loci. It's playful. It's a little bit mischievous, but the insight into the human psyche is profound. So hence something that I say often: I don't look for the Bible for theological direction, but I do look for the Bible in its profound insights to the human condition, meaning the 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 um, what's called the philosophical anthropological, a philosophy of what it means to be a human being. We're thrown into situations we don't understand. They seem to conspire against us, and we have to figure our way out anyway. We're in a maze, and we're stuck in this maze. I'll say that's something of the philosophic anthropology of the human condition. And then, of course, the archetypal psychological insight is that we're burdened down by shame, misdirection, not understanding what's at stake. So again, I look for the Bible for philosophic anthropology, for archetypal psychology, not for theology. And this few chapters are, I think, a prime example of my reasoning of why I love the Bible, because the divine is part of the problem, figured here, part of the problem of the human condition. In any case, we come now to, I'll say, meeting God in Austin, kind of a line, where in verse 8, it says, Vayishma'u et kol Adonai mithalech bagan l'ruach hayom. Now look at how my art school translation tries to dress up this embarrassingly this embarrassing description of the divine walking around the garden in the wind of the day. So my art scroll says, they heard the sound of Hashem God manifesting in the garden. Well, the Hebrew does not say manifesting. The Hebrew says walking around. Now, we don't like that. Now, if the poem we just read was theology, we don't like it that he meets God. He says, kind of a quarter, kind of bum a cigarette. I'm going to steal your Bic lighter. On the other hand, grants him love. So this idea of this playful understanding of God. So again, I'm going to have to believe that these authors were utterly sophisticated. And when they said so here they're dressed in fig leaves, they've eaten from the forbidden fruit, they know they're naked, they're looking at each other and say, wow, we really messed up. This is not what we expected. Oh no. And then the divine that told them not to do it. God, he was right, but he did. But he said we're going to die. We didn't die. This is actually kind of worse than death. Walking around the garden, l'ruach hayom. It's a wonderful, such a disconcerting line that I think it has to be intentionally there to disrupt our thinking about the divine. Vayitchabeh Adam v'ishto, and the earthman and his woman hid. Mipnei Adonai Elohim betoch etz hagan. So it says betoch etz hagan, in the trees of the garden. So how do we have this idea of the divine walking around? They run and hide, right? Vayikra Adonai Elohim el Hadam, and Adonai Elohim says to the earthman, Vayomer lo Ayeka, where are you? Where'd you go? Now, here's where all the commentators I read said this, and I've given this to our Torah. Ayeka, where are you existentially? Where are you found? Beautiful divrei Torah, but here we have this comical idea that the as it were omniscient, all-present God has lost track of them. He says, I thought I left you right here by the tree. Where'd you guys go? So and he's like hide and seek. He's going to go looking for them. Now, I'm not saying this doesn't have a deep metaphoric dimension. I think our author is too sophisticated to have missed the metaphoric sense of we hide from the divine can't find us. But here it's in a story that has a bit more of a both comic and tragic comic character to it. That we're now in verse 9 and 10. Vayomer et kolcha shamati. I heard the sound of you. Bagan va'ira, and I was afraid. Ki erum anochi, because I'm naked. Ve'echaveh, and I hid. Vayomer mi higid lecha ki erum ata, and who told you you were naked? Now, we're going to assume that God knew what would happen if they ate from the tree. So on one hand, the divine knew they wouldn't die, so that was actually not exactly true, but knew there would be the death of innocence. We assume the divine was wise to their having eaten from the fruit of the tree, but maybe not. Maybe the divine in the Garden of Eden story is not omniscient and omnipresent. Maybe not even know that the Nachash, that the serpent, was lurking about in the tree. He says, who told you that you were naked? Hamin ha'etz asher tziviticha levilti achol mimenu achalta. He says, did indeed you eat from the tree that I told you not to eat from it? Right? So now they're caught. And again, that childhood experience probably burned into our memories. Hope you can all remember the first time you were caught. I want you to imagine, try to remember You did something, you were doing something you weren't supposed to do. You were hiding. It was a private moment and you were caught. I remember when I was a kid, I subscribed to Mad Magazine and had little stickers. It says like this bit didn't say this business is corrupt, but more Mad Magazine kind of stuff. So I wanted to go around and stick them everywhere. Like stick them on a car, stick them on a gas station. And I went behind a gas station, I stuck it, and the owner came around the corner. Whoa. And he looked, he says, what are you doing? I have a stickers. What does it say? He says, why are you doing this? I said, I don't know why I'm doing this. I don't know. And man, I can remember this today, like from the top of my head down to my toes and back up, turning completely red in embarrassment, shame, got caught. I just wanted to put a sticker on the back door of the gas station. And wow, and he said, yeah, don't do that. I said, okay, thank you. And I took off. And I thought he was going to beat me up or something. But if you remember, I assume you all remember being caught out. And again, I think I must have been 9 when this happened. Um, all right, so he said, "Did you eat from it?" And the man says, "Now look at this. This is great." Vayomer ha'adam. The man said, um, "The woman that you gave me to be with me, she gave it to me um, from the tree, and I ate." So look at the diversion. Did you eat from it? He doesn't even answer. He says, "Ha'isha asher natata." The woman that you gave her placed imadi with me. He natnali min ha'es la'ochal. So we assume the divine saying, it's not what I asked you. I just asked you a yes or no question. Did you eat from it? You can't even answer me. You have to right away shift responsibility to the woman. I told you not to eat it. You ate it. You want to blame her. So we imagine the divine saying, I'm going to take a note of this. Um, and then Vayomer Elohim la'isha, and the Elohim says to the woman, Ma zot asit. What have you done? Now, I just have to dilate here. Rabbi Manning and I have given many divrei Torah on this term mazot over and over again in the book of Genesis, and hopefully we'll get to them all. Maybe collect all of them. Mazot is the Bible focusing on a moment that switches things. Mazot is what is this wondrous thing that is now going to change the arc of the story. So the first mazot is here in Genesis, Genesis chapter 3, and the term repeats over and over again throughout the book of Genesis. Maybe as I sum up these few chapters, I'll bring in you a collection of all the mazots in the book of Genesis. I think really only in the book of Genesis. He said, Mazot, Laisha, Mazot asit, what have you done? She doesn't answer. She said, Toma Isha, Hanachash, Hisianu ba'ochal. The snake tempted me. Neither of them answered the question. He says, did you eat from it? She gave it to me. Did you eat from it? He seduced me. Right? Now, is this not the human condition? The minute you're caught out, right away blame. Don't take responsibility. Don't be accountable. Blame somebody else. Already then they knew how people are, and of course it's an object lesson to us. um I have to say, in so many um counseling sessions, you've heard this in my teaching, where I'll ask somebody a question and they become agitated, they start to squirm in their seat, and they give me a story. And I realized this is part of the training. So I listened to everything. I said, "Look, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you a question, and you can say yes, no, or maybe. But I'd like you and answer me directly." And people look at me frozen, adult to adult. They've come to me for help, and I'm trying to figure out what's going on. And how often people, instead of an answer, they give a story, an exculpatory story. You need context, you need background. And you've heard me say this enough. Actually, I just need to know what happened. I need the police report. And you've heard me say this many times, how sometimes it is nigh impossible to get from people what happened. I remember one case in particular. I spent an entire hour trying to find out what happened. And the person was so used to building these narratival distractions and deviations that I think I know what happened. But what's interesting for me is how much the person was dedicated to misdirecting me, misleading me. And I realized they've been doing this all their life to themselves and to other people. Um, Eventually I was working with it ended up being a couple, and I said, I really want to help you, but I have to know what's happening. And the guy had a story to tell, and the more he told his story, the more I began asking, his story was falling apart. Now, this was a guy that lived by this narrative that his wife is bad and he is good. And she lived by the narrative, I'm probably bad. And then until she would rage, because I think the shame wound hit, she raged back at him. He would see, you can't control yourself. This was the game they were playing. And I wanted to know what she did that was so bad. And so I inquired from my perspective, gently with a surgical knife. He probably felt like it was a hammer, because the closer we got to what became clear to me that his accusations against his wife were completely irrational and disproportionate. He began to really sweat. He says, "You need more context." I said, I really don't need context. I would just like to know if this is what you just said to me. I would repeat words that he had just said to me. Right? He couldn't take it. As I moved along, you can see this coming. He finally said, "I've had enough of this," and stormed out of the room, left the room. We were back at the building. But I didn't hear the door open. So I looked at the woman. I see, I think I see what's going on. He runs back in the room. He says, "I just want to make sure she doesn't start lying to you." I said, "Look, you can sit down and join in, or you can leave, but you can't go around the corner and listen and pop in whenever you want." He finally left. And I said to the woman, I said, "I understand enough. There's trouble in Dodge City. So I'm going to try to give you strategies for working with this, but I want to tell you, you're not bad. There's nothing to be ashamed of. You sound to me like a moral, rational person who's married into an ambush. And it seems that his life purpose is to be punitive and ambush you. And your life purpose is to feel bad about yourself. So hopefully we can change this today." So that's one anecdote of, right? Ask a question. No, no, no. She did it. Ask her a question. No, he did it. And I can imagine the divine saying, "Well, we have some counseling to do." But this divine doesn't counsel. This divine is not a counselor, not a liberal. This divine says, "Okay, so noted. There's consequences." Um, now now we're going to see when the divine goes to the snake. Now remember, the snake is on to the God image here. The snake overheard the divine saying, "If you eat from it, we'll die." The snake seems to know the nature of the tree. In fact, I don't know who said it to me last time. I said, the snake clearly already ate from the tree. The snake's looking at the tree, says, "Wow, like didn't tell me not to eat from it." So in this, and whoever said it, thank you, thank you, thank you. Where the snake eats from it, goes, "Wow, I'm naked too." I'm naked. And maybe the snake said, "Well, if I know that I'm naked, I want you to know that you're naked," which means I'm not going to be the only person suffering here, the only being suffering here. In any case, God looks at the serpent. Now the serpent is on to the divine. So while the serpent may have been the con, you might say the divine set up, intentionally or not, set up the con. So God doesn't say to the serpent, "What have you done? Why have you done it?" It just says, "Because you have done this, you are cursed from all the animals and all the animals of the field. Al gechoncha telech, you will go on your belly, va'afar tochal, and you will eat from the dust, kol yimei chayecha, all the days of your life." And I can imagine the snake wanting to say, "But wait a minute," but he didn't have any hands to raise, and God did not want to hear. God did not want to hear. "Yeah, but I just told them what you said. So there's a problem here. I could not have done it had you not lied to them." So the divine is not interested in what the snake has to say. And I think this is intentional, because the snake could out the divine. What if the snake would say to God, "Hold on for a second. He did say you would die, and you didn't die. So I didn't start this." So the snake is cursed to crawling around on the ground. And as I was thinking about this yesterday and this morning, I thought the snake has something to say, but can't say it so God hears. So what does the snake do? The snake hisses. So every time you hear the snake hiss or rattle, he's saying, look, I know something you need to know. I know something you need to know. I can't say it out loud because I don't, this is bad enough. I don't have any arms, legs. I can't talk anymore. I got to crawl around the ground, but I need to tell you something. Sometimes the snake is so angry at us, the snake will put venom into us. So I began to develop a mythology, not of the ancient archetypal snake, but something of the image of the snake today. I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your offspring and her. He will pound your head and you will bite his heel. Right. So there's kind of an etiological myth. What do snakes do? They nip at our heels. What do people do in those days? I guess they step on the snake. And then he says to the woman, okay, now you, um, I will greatly increase your suffering and your childbearing. In pain shall you bear children. Yet your craving shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. Right. So part of discovering that they're naked is discovering teshukah. Here is a very strong word for desire, meaning sexual desire. The question being, if childbearing were so painful, why would women want to get pregnant? And now I don't know if this is true. I'm not a woman. Most women I know who bear children wanted to bear children. They didn't see, on one hand, I have craving toward sex with my husband or a man. On the other hand, if I do that, I'm going to bear a child. I haven't heard that, but this seems to be written in the idea you're going to have craving. The result of the craving is going to be a lot of pain, either the pain in actually the actual bearing of the child, but the pain of raising children. Uh, uh, Again, but from myself and my wife, everybody else I knew, we deeply wanted to have children. Our teshukah was to have a child. We didn't have any problem that we had a desire toward each other. That we really had desire for a child, but the divine seemed to be reflecting something. Maybe because in old days people died in childbirth and so forth. They said you're in an impossible situation. The most painful thing a woman who bears a child will go through is probably bearing that child, and you can't stop yourself. In any case, and now he comes to the Adam, whom God directly told, don't eat from the tree, because you listen to the voice of your wife, to the Isha. Now, again, he seems to be blaming the Isha as opposed to blaming him. I told you not to eat. It doesn't make any difference that your wife offered it to you. So the divine seems to be playing into this idea that the Isha, the woman, did it. And ate from the tree that I told you, you shall not eat from it. Accursed is the ground because of you. Now, this is like the snake is cursed. Now, the ground is cursed. Um, Through suffering shall you eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles shall it sprout from you. You shall eat the herb of the field. By the sweat of your brow you shall eat bread until you return to the ground from which you were taken. For you are dust, and to dust you will return. Now, this may have already been some kind of ancient saying, knowing that we're matter, knowing that we decompose. So maybe this idea that you are from dust, to dust you will return was already part of the ancient wisdom tradition. We certainly find it in Psalms, we find it in our liturgy. So this perhaps folk saying was now placed into this very, very complex story that what we live, the difficulty, and remember, we don't feel this anymore because of mass production of food and living in a society where complex economy where our produce is delivered to us. I read enough to know what it means to be directly, that your life is directly connected to what you can get out of the ground. I've read about famine and drought and storms and crops being ruined, and the idea that this is the human condition. Somehow we've brought this upon ourselves. Eking out a living is terrible, and if you want to have some bread, you're going to sweat a lot before you can taste any food. So this is something of an etiological myth, meaning how did things get this way? And things got this way because, again, this is an existential rumination. An original human being chose to defy the divine, becoming conscious, not in the way they thought. They were not going to become godlike, at least not yet. And what happened instead was all of this, the life that we lead. I think this also reflects the idea that even though we lead lives like this, we know it ought not be this way. So many people say, why is it like this? I say, it's the human condition. Should it be like this? Obviously not. So think about that. How we experience the world, we carry a knowledge that the world is not supposed to be like this. It's an interesting thing. You would think that our thoughts would be created by how the world is. Even a little child who gets in trouble and their parents are being disproportionate, they know it's disproportionate. They know that mommy or daddy is not being fair. How does the child know if they have, a dysregulated parent, that the parent is dysregulated? All they've known is those parents. So we seem to have some kind of, I'll say, genetic memory of Eden, of living at peace with the land and with the animals. And we're now in this realm of exile, but that is our true nature. It's one of the most deeply mysterious things for me. And this for me speaks into what I'll call, I'm not sure how to articulate this, what I'll call a true theology. The true theology is the divine in this story does not measure up to the divine. Now, you read this and you know that, right? You read, said, well, God shouldn't be acting this way. How do you know how God should be acting? Because you have an inborn, implicit knowledge of how the divine should be. That's where God is. What I'll call the true God is part of your knowledge. The authentic self is in your knowledge. So what you know to be true is not what you have learned, it's what you know from within. You know this is not the divine. This is a story where the divine does not come up looking very well. You know that the world should not be this way. You know there should be much greater love and and the world should be different. How do you know that? This for me, in one way, again, I don't know quite how to articulate, is some kind of evidence of the divine that we know the truth and that the world does not reflect this truth. Now, in verse 20, in chapter 3, verse 20, it says, the earth man called his wife Chava because she had become the mother of all living. Now, she had not given birth yet. That's to come in the next chapter. But now is when she's given the name Chava or Eve. So we talk about Adam and Eve in the Garden of Creation, more properly, the earth man and his woman, until verse 20, where she gets a name, Chava, but he still lacks a name. His name is not Adam. His species is Adam. I don't think anywhere he actually gets a name. But Adam is good enough. Now, verse 22, look at this. Vayomer Adonai Elohim. And Adonai Elohim said. Now, remember, I showed in previous lessons, Elohim can refer to the one God. Elohim can refer to the divine council, which means the one God meeting up with the divine council. So now Adonai Elohim seems to mean something like Adonai with the divine council. So look at verse 22. Hen ha'adam haya kachad mimenu. Look, the Adam has become like us. Okay? Perspicacious, understanding the human condition, understanding shame. Right? All the things that we, God's thought that we only knew, they've now come to know. The Adam has become like one of us. Ladat tovara, knowing good and evil. Ve'ata, and now, pen yishlach yado, lest he stretch out his hand and take from Eitz HaChaim, the tree of life, and he'll eat it and live forever. So, again, this is a very disturbing verse that people try to explain away until you accept the idea of the divine council. There's a divine council. They're very jealous of their prerogatives. The human being has come much too close. In fact, there's a verse in the Psalms that calls the human being a little lower than the angels, a little lower than the angels. I just read it this week. I didn't write down where I read it from, but this is an understanding. If you have the divine counsel here, we're one step down. And the divine counsel realizes we're just one step from being part of the divine counsel, which is eternal life. the eternal life of as it were the angels and so forth. And this is Vayishchalchehu, and let us therefore exile. And therefore Adonai Elohim sent sent him from the Gan Eden, and then it says to what? La'avod et ha'adama, to work the land asher lukach mimenu, from which he was taken. So he came from the land, he will now work the land. Vayigaresh et hadam, and he exiled the human being. And now vayashken mikedem legan eden, and he placed vayashken, stationed mikedem legan eden, east of Eden, et kruvim, the kruvim, that we say cherub, but they're really fiery angels. That lahat hacherub hamit hapechet, and the blade of the flame of the ever turning sword, lishmor et derech et hachayim. So here's where the Garden of Eden story ends. And so we just have to imagine here, they're exiled, mikedem. Now, kedem in temporal terms means beforehand. Kedem in geographical terms means east, hence east of Eden. East of Eden is the place where you go toward which you are exiled. Going back to my former drashes on Highway 61 that you've heard, that you've perhaps read about. Highway 61, where is it? It's just east of Eden. If you ever wanted to know where I-61 is, they're sent there. And then, and I think this is profound and intentional, the divine stations east of Eden, the Kruvim. The Kruvim, of course, reappear in the story of the Mishkan, where the Kruvim are hovering over, stationed over the ark. They're embroidered in the Mishkan, which is a clear sign that the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and the ark is the path to Eitz HaChaim, the tree of life, enshrined in the verse from Psalms. Eitz is a Eitz Chaim Machazikim Ba, is a tree of life to those who hold on to it. So this idea of the tree of life is then buried, as it were, into the Bible. It then reappears, the Kruvim in the Mishkan, and then reappears in Psalms, that the teaching is the tree of life, which means Eden is not a place you go. Eden is a place you create inside of you. So the story has been used beautifully by our tradition to add this other part of our philosophic anthropology. We yearn to go back to the garden before eating of the tree, the idyllic garden. We know that it's there. There's a path back to Eden, according to the book of Exodus. It is through the teaching as we are taught in Psalms. So when this wraps up into the Kruvim, it sets up an entirely different aspect of human philosophic anthropology, which is the path back to Eden. All right, next week, we're going to do the Cain and Abel story. And again, it's not what you think it is. It is much more tragic, much more mysterious, I think, than you've ever been taught.